Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Budale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavani Paschata Deshatarine Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gauravakmanda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare 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 Krishna. So welcome to our part 4 of advancing in Krishna consciousness during the lockdown. In today's part, we discuss hearing lectures of Srila Prabhupada and your Diksha Guru. And we also discuss learning and memorizing shlokas. Okay, so we'll begin now. I'll share the screen. So part 4, advancing in Krishna consciousness during the lockdown. The aim of this presentation is using the lockdown to practice good sadhana and advance in Krishna consciousness. So what we defined as good sadhana. Sadhana means daily spiritual practices for spiritual elevation. So what we define here, sleep timings should be regulated, rising early, following the morning program, reading BHAGAVAD-GITA, SRIMAD Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, hearing lectures of Srila Prabhupada and our Diksha Guru, learning and memorizing shlokas, preparing bhoga for Krishna. And we have to be careful of reducing TV time and electronic asatsang. So today, actually in the invite in the group, I mistakenly put different topics, but our 2 topics today are here. Hearing lectures of Prabhupada and our Diksha Guru, and learning and memorizing shlokas. Okay, so we'll begin. Beginning first with hearing lectures of Srila Prabhupada and the Diksha Guru. Importance of hearing in the bhakti process. Now, some of you who have read Srimad Bhagavatam or are familiar with Prabhupada's teachings, you will know that many times he mentions about the NAVA Bhakti, which are the 9 forms of bhakti according to Prahlad Maharaj. Out of those 9, the foremost is hearing. Okay, we are going to look at regarding importance of hearing in the bhakti process. We look at these 9 forms of bhakti, and we'll also look at SRIMAD Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-GITA, how they glorify the process of hearing Krishna Katha as a means of purification. Okay, so we first start with the 9 forms of bhakti, Navavida Bhakti, according to Prahlad Maharaj. The Navavida Bhakti is here. It's given in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5, Text 23. So Prahlad Maharaj says, Shri Prahlad Uvacha, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, Smaranam Pada Sevanam, Archanam Vandanam Dasyam, Sakyam Atma Nivedanam, Iti Pumsarpita Vishnu, Bhakti Chain Navalakshana, Kriyeta Bhagavati Adha, Tanmanye Dhi Tam Uttamam. Translation. Well, before we look at, actually, I will look at translation in our database, which is not open. Okay. Okay, so we look at, database has to be open. Okay, we just read a verse by Prahlad Maharaj, and this verse is often spoken by Srila Prabhupada. It contains 9 different forms that we practice Krishna consciousness or bhakti. It's in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 5. And text 21. sorry, 23. Okay, here it is. Now we look at the translation. I just read that verse. Okay, so translation, I'll put it on the screen. Prahladu Vacha, hearing and chanting about the transcendental holy name, form, qualities, and paraphernalia and pastimes of Lord Vishnu, remembering them, serving the lotus feet of the Lord, offering the Lord respectful worship with 16 types of paraphernalia, offering prayers to the Lord, becoming his servant, considering the Lord one's best friend, and surrendering everything unto him. In other words, serving him with the body, mind, and words. These 9 processes are accepted as pure devotional service. One who has dedicated his life to the service of Krishna through these 9 methods should be understood to be the most learned person, for he has acquired complete knowledge. These are the verses we read out. Okay, these are the forms of bhakti. Now, yeah, the thing we want to show is that the first item is Shravanam. Okay, Shravanam is the first. Because out of Shravanam, everything else comes. First of all, I will not know about bhakti until someone tells me. Someone will tell me about bhakti, then I will hear. Then I will hear, and then I will broadcast, I will glorify Krishna, Kirtanam. Then I'll remember what I heard, and then Pada Sevanam, I'll serve the lotus feet of the Lord. Now, in this way, the whole process of bhakti starts and is performed, but it starts by Shravanam, hearing. Hearing is very important. So by hearing about Krishna, one is able to begin the process of bhakti. Okay. So NAVA bhakti. Why were these here? So Shravanam, we said, NAVA bhakti. I just read out the translation. There are 9 forms of bhakti. Okay, first now let's look at this point. Prahlad Maharaj spoke those 9 forms of bhakti, out of which he said the first is Shravanam, hearing about Krishna. And when we hear, then the bhakti process begins, and then we learn to do other things, other processes. All right, now the question is, why did Prahlad Maharaj speak these verses? That we'll find if we just look at here, the previous verse. The previous verse, Hiranya Kashipur Vacha Praradana Chuttam Tata Svadhitam Kinchit Uttamam Kalinai Tavata Yushman Yad Ashikshad Guror Bhavan. Translation. Hiranyakashipu said, my dear Prahlad, my dear son, O long-lived one, for so much time you have heard many things from your teachers. Now please repeat to me whatever you think is the best of that knowledge. So then Prahlad Maharaj spoke this, but of course he didn't learn this from his teacher. He learned it from, guess from Narad Muni, when he was still in the womb, when he was preaching to Prahlad's mother. So that time Prahlad Maharaj heard it. Okay, so here we are seeing why were the verses spoken? Because Hiranyakashipu asked, what was the best thing you have learned? And this is what he gave, the 9 forms of bhakti, Navavida bhakti. This is the best thing I heard. Now notice that in those verses we read, Shravanam is first, as I mentioned. Hearing is the first step in bhakti. We have to hear very carefully. We have to hear who is Krishna. We have to hear who am I. Then we have to hear what is relation between me and Krishna. There's a lot that we have to hear. And if we did not hear properly, then we will not practice properly. Okay. So here. Next, other processes are enforced by it and follow it from it. So by hearing, everything else follows. And if hearing is good, then our bhakti is good. The whole practice is good. And that's what we are seeing here, enforced. Kirtan is enforced. Our puja, archan, when we hear shravanam, then everything else comes out nicely. And if we do not hear, then after some time, we are not able to practice properly. Prahlad Maharaj, he had this knowledge, but as I mentioned, he didn't learn it from his teacher. His teachers were Asurik. They were Shanda and Amarka. They were not teaching bhakti. Prahlad Maharaj heard this from Narad Muni when he was in the womb of his mother. So he remembered all of it. And because of what he heard, he became a devotee. He became purified because of hearing. And he was born a devotee. And many times in ISKCON, they say this point that if the mother is carrying a child, if she's pregnant, then the ISKCON devotees tell her, you read Krishna book and read it out loud. You will hear and the child will hear. And when the child hears, then the child will become a devotee when he's born, or he'll be very devotional. So from the beginning, let the child hear, read out Krishna book. This form of Navavida Bhakti, which we just said, actually the whole of it comes in this song called Bhaja Hure Mana by Govinda Das. It's one of the Vaishnav bhajans in ISKCON's Vaishnav songbook. Some of you may be having that. So there, Govinda Das is saying, Bhaja Hure Mana Shri Nandanandana Abhay Charanarvindare. Oh mind, just worship, just meditate on Sri Nandanandana, the son of Nanda Maharaj. Abhay Charanarvindane. One who, that personality is he who, at whose feet one attains fearlessness. So the song goes on, and at one stage, he reads out all these verses. So that is. So in conclusion, what we are seeing here is Prahlad Maharaj, he's a Mahajan. He's recommended as one of the 12 great personalities from whom we have to take shiksha, instruction. And he says, Shravanam is the first item of bhakti from which everything follows. So hearing is important. That is the subject now. Importance of hearing. This is what Bhagavatam says. Okay, now we are going to a section here. Bhagavad-Gita and Bhagavatam glorify Shravan. Now here, this is Bhagavad-Gita chapter 7, text 1. There, Sri Krishna says, Sri Bhagavan Vacha Maya Saktamana Partha Yogam Yunjanma Dashayaha Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yathagnyasya Takshunu. So he says, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So Krishna is saying that basically to become Krishna conscious, to know him, to know God means to become Krishna conscious. There's no way to know God. Bhaktyamam abhijanati, unless we are fully purified. So how to come to that stage? And Supreme Personality of God is saying, hear, hear. And hearing, why is he saying to hear? Because he's going to speak Bhagavad-Gita. He's going to speak that knowledge to purify us, to purify Arjuna. And we'll hear the same thing. We'll also be able to practice yoga. Yoga means not Ashtanga yoga, these asanas, but yoga means the system for understanding God and connecting to God, reconnecting. Yoga means connection. So by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, we'll be practicing yoga and our mind will become attached to Krishna, we'll be in full consciousness, then we will know him and be free. We will know him in full, free from doubt. So how to attain that stage? Krishna is saying here, I'll tell you, listen, listen. Okay, now in this particular verse, 7.1, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada emphasizes this Tatshunu, hear that, listen, listen. Krishna is telling Arjuna. So Prabhupada emphasizes just these two words very deeply. He goes into that point. he discusses the importance of hearing. Shrunu. Shnu here, I mean, it comes from the word Shravan. Okay, so he says, he discusses the importance of hearing. Okay, he quotes a series of verses from SRIMAD BHAGAVATM to show how we attain perfection by hearing Krishna Katha. So he quotes these verses, and they are, I think, 5 in number. And by those verses, he tells us how stage by stage we attain perfection by hearing. What happens at this stage, and then the next stage, and next stage. It's very scientific. Bhagavatam is scientific. So is Bhagavad-GITA. All right, so the verse, sorry, this is here it is. Okay, so I said it. So the verses he lists are SRIMAD BHAGAVATM 1 to 17 to 21. Okay, so now I'm going to go to that. Okay, here. Bhagavad-GITA, chapter 7, text 1. So here it is, the verse. And this is the purport. It goes on like this. Okay, till there. Now, here's the verses that Srila Prabhupada quotes in the purport to explain this verse of Krishna, where he said, Tatshunu, here how you can become Krishna conscious, how you can know me, how you can attain full consciousness of me. That's what we want to do. That's why we are here. We want to attain Krishna consciousness. So how to do it? Krishna says, here, listen. Okay, so now listen. Then Prabhupada speaks about that. Listen, listen. Tatshunu. He speaks throughout here about hearing. Okay. Then, here it says, one should therefore begin practicing yoga, begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 forms, NAVA VIDHA, we explained, of which Shravanam is the first and most important. Hearing is the most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, Tatshanu, oh, hear from me. No one can be a greater authority than Krishna. Therefore, by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity to become a perfectly Krishna conscious person. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly or from a pure devotee of Krishna, not from a non-devotee upstart. Okay, when we're talking about hearing, we in ISKCON, we mean Srila Prabhupada and his followers and disciples and those who follow him properly. All right. Now, then Prabhupada, after explaining that, he quotes these verses. Now we're going to read the Sanskrit and translation. Shrinvatam swakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanaha hridyantosta hiya badhrani vidhunoti suhatsatam nashtaprayeshva badreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagati uttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki tada rajastamo bhava kama lobha dayashchaye cheter eter anavidham stitham satve prasidati evam prasana manaso bhagavad-bhakti yogataha bhagavad-tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate vidyate hridya grantish chidyante sarvasangshayaha kshiyante chasya karmani drishtayvat manishvare. Now I'm going to read the translation, and as I mentioned even earlier, that people, when we read out some texts like this, many people switch off. It's not as exciting as when I'm speaking. So try to pay attention, because these are important verses, and I'm going to read the translation stage by stage. So it says there, to hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad-Gita is itself a righteous activity. Okay, that is coming from this point. Punya Shravana Kirtana. That means, even if you just sit in the lecture and hear, or if you hear from your recording on the phone or some device, so you'll become pious. Pious means that it destroys so many sinful reactions that gradually one becomes pious and honest. And I remember some people once, I was in a temple and speaking to one person in the Sunday program. I asked him that, how long have you been coming? He said, actually, I'm coming 2 years. So I told him, oh, you have not become a devotee. You hearing. He said, no, but I had big changes just by sitting and hearing here. I gave up smoking and I stopped tea, coffee, and I stopped all bad habits. So simply by hearing about Krishna, punya shravana kirtana, punya, we become pious. Of course, that's not the best thing. Now we're going to explain what more happens if we hear more sincerely and desire purification. Okay, so it's a righteous activity. Now it says, and for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. So inside everyone's heart is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna is residing in our heart, and as we hear about him, then inside the heart he purifies us. He makes us, removes the guna, the material desires, and we become purified. So this is the system, that if one desires to hear about Krishna and is keen to hear, then Krishna detects that. So whenever we hear, like now you're hearing, and if you listen to a lecture of Prabhupada, you're hearing, or if you go to the temple, well, you cannot go to the temple now. So anyway, when we hear, inside Krishna purifies us, and then that makes us pious. It spiritualizes us. Okay, so continuing here. Krishna, dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as the best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge, because the knowledge actually is inside our heart. This is a important point, that the full knowledge of Krishna consciousness and who am I and who is Krishna, that is in our heart. It is hidden, but it is covered by Maya, by material energy. So if we hear more about Krishna, then he purifies. When he purifies the material energy and the Maya, then what happens? That knowledge manifests more. Our spiritual nature, I begin to perceive I am an eternal soul, because the material covering goes. I perceive I am eternal soul, then I begin to perceive God, Krishna, and so many other things. Spiritual awakening happens. Okay, so a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in devotional service of the Lord. Simply by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, one becomes more fixed in bhakti. Okay, because why? Because we explained that the material desires and material consciousness goes. Okay, so then what is remaining inside, what is there, is that our natural love for Krishna awakens when we hear from Bhagavatam, because Bhagavatam only discusses about Krishna and transcendental topics. Any section of the Bhagavatam you take, if we study it and hear it, it purifies us, because it's all Bhagavatam means in relation to Bhagavan, Krishna. Okay, by development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. So when bhakti manifests, then the modes, they go. Modes are basically Maya, Triguna, Sattvagun, Rajagun, Tamagun. So by developing devotional service, that goes. When then, these different anarthas like lust, anger, envy, greed, anxiety, whatever these things are, they're all products of the Triguna, the modes of material nature, particularly the lower modes. That is this mode of passion and mode of ignorance, Rajagun and Tamagun. When Rajagun and Tamagun go, then all these bad qualities go. But they cannot go unless we regularly hear about Krishna from Bhagavad-GITA and Bhagavatam. As I said, as you are doing now, you are hearing. When we regularly hear it, stimulates our Krishna consciousness and awakens and gives us deeper desire for chanting, deeper desire to serve and to advance. So hearing is important. So when we hear the modes of nature are destroyed, okay, thus material lust and avarice are diminished. Material lust, envy, anger, greed, all of these decrease. Depression, anxiety, these are unnatural. The soul is by nature Anandamaya Bhyasat, happy, pure, Shuddha. He is completely purified and pure servant of Krishna. He's a spiritual being. But because we developed, we associated with the modes of nature through sense gratification in past lives, so now those modes are, it has created a dirt in our consciousness. It has remained there. Because in a past life, I was doing sense gratification, which comes under the guna, rajaguna, tamoguna. So then I got infected. Okay, but it says here now, continuing, when these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness. We are not in pure goodness now. At the moment, we are infected by rajagun, tamagun, and sattva gun is desirable. Actually, we should have sattva gun, but we don't have that. We have other modes also. So that is causing a problem for us. But the more we hear, then we become fixed in pure goodness. Pure goodness means only sattva gun. When that happens, we become enlivened. Evam prasanna manaso, that we become prasanna, happy. Why do we become happy? Because the cause of our depression is the Maya. Samsara tapan akhilan avabnoti antra sandatan. In Vishnu Puran it says that this third energy of Krishna, known as Maya, is what causes the suffering of the jiva. So that suffering is removed when the Maya goes. How to remove Maya? Hear about Krishna. Then when we hear, the lower modes go. When the lower modes go, only sattva gun is there. Pure sattva, shuddha sattva means spiritual. So when the spiritual nature is there, only the spiritual part, that is makes us happy because all the impurities have gone. When the impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position. Steady in the sense that I'm not disturbed by externals. I'm not elated excessively when I hear any good news, or very depression if I hear bad news. No, I'm steady. Why am I steady? Because I am enlivened. I'm happy, peaceful due to coming in sattva guna. Okay, these are positions. We can see gradually what happens as one advances. He becomes remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, enlivened, and understands the science of God perfectly. We cannot know God unless we approach him through bhakti. This is bhakti, hearing about God. And of course, here, I mean, it's not written, but hearing means one has to be serving also, somehow engaged. Okay, because this is explaining about devotee who will hear about God, one who wants to come to God, one who is, anyone hearing Bhagavatam is a devotee. So at the same time, he will be practicing forms of bhakti. But without the hearing, it will not happen, or it will be very long. So this happens by hearing and by performing devotional service. So it says that once the impurities are wiped away, we become enlivened by devotional service, and then we understand the science of God. How do we understand science of God? Because we are cleared of the contamination. That, as I said, that the knowledge of God, and it's inside, but it has to come out by proper practice of bhakti. The knowledge has to manifest. So the knowledge becomes manifest. We understand the science of God. All right, then thus bhakti yoga severs the heart knot of material affection. When we understand God, then that is the perfection. That is the perfection. We are at the stage of liberation, practice. Basically, that means Bhagavat Tattva Yogataha, it says in the shloka. Bhagavat Tattva Vijnanam, science of God. mukta sangasya jayate. Okay, the bhakti yoga, that is understands of God. Okay, then here, bhakti yoga severs the hard knot of material affection. What is this? They're speaking about the hard knot of material perfection. That is the knot which everyone has, which is known as the Hridaya Granthi. On one hand, we have material nature, and on the other hand is the soul. So the soul is tied to nature in with a hard knot. There's a knot which is holding, which we cannot let go, and we are attached to this body. And what is attached to the body? Nation, family, society, country, all attachments pertaining to the body. We have that attachment. Why? Because of the Hridaya Granthi, the knot in the heart, which is tying us, the soul, to the material nature, the hard knot. And our interest is to remove this knot, become detached, then we can go, the soul, can return back. But now we cannot go, we keep taking birth. Even if we die, we take birth again. Even when we are alive now, we are attached so much. Okay, so that hard knot here, we're speaking about. Bhakti Yoga severs that hard knot of material affection. Our attachment goes to this material world, material body. Our suffering is because of the body and because of our material affection. Okay, I give this example many times. If someone is in a car and the car is his car, if someone hits the car, he becomes very disturbed and angry and depressed. Now, if he's driving because he's attached to the car, naturally he spent a lot of money for it. But if somebody is renting a car and that car is hit very badly, then he's not affected. He thinks, oh, what is it? I got hit. Okay, let me try and hide it. He doesn't care. Why? It's not his car. So we have to realize that it's not our body. It's not, this is not us. It will go, it's here temporary. And everything which we call ours, it's not really ours. So that hard knot is severed, it's broken. And then it enables one to come at once to the stage of asamshayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Personality. Drishta kshiyante chasya karmani, drishta evatman ishvare. We'll be able to understand God when we reach the state of bhakti, when the knot is broken in the heart. Okay, so that happens by hearing. This is important process. Hearing, what happens? Look, remember chapter 7, text 1, you can look at it in your own time. How by hearing Bhagavatam and Bhagavad-GITA we elevate. Okay, now Prabhupada concludes by saying, therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or devotee can one understand the science of Krishna. Now, when we are reading, I told you that's extension of hearing, but hearing is hearing. Now we also have to hear. Okay. All right. So this is explaining about by regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, we attain perfection. Basically, that's what it says. That Srimad Bhagavatam, in these verses we read out, is that by regularly hearing Bhagavatam, we attain supreme perfection. So we should hear lectures daily, not even once. If we have time, again. Okay, actually, I'm not sharing the screen. Is required? Yes, it is. Okay. Okay, so I'll share the screen. Okay, yeah, I was saying that by regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, we attain perfection. That's what all these verses are explaining. So we should hear daily, hear lectures, hear people speaking, hear Prabhupada, hear from your Guru. How should we hear? Attentive is best. That means that while the lecture is going on, I sit and I hear carefully, as you are doing now. Okay, but if you cannot do that, sometime our days like that, we cannot properly spend time like that. Okay, then while you're doing your different jobs, work, whatever you're doing, put the lecture on in the background. Okay, that is another way. So now another thing is that members of ISKCON have to hear Srila Prabhupada more than anyone. Of course, you're hearing me now and you hear many people, but Srila Prabhupada we should hear every day, morning, night, and then anyone else should be little less. Of course, after that, your Diksha Guru, and anyone else you hear from. When we hear, we should hear with full faith. Understand that Prabhupada did not make a mistake, does not make mistakes. What he's speaking is Shastra. What he's speaking is self-realized, pure knowledge. So we should properly, with faith, tell him, hear from him. You can hear seminars or lectures of others also. Otherwise, why are you here? You're listening to me also. So make sure you, okay. So you can hear seminars or lectures of others if you get inspired. Somehow or other, if you think I have to hear that seminar or that, why? It will inspire me. Okay, good. But within ISKCON, anyone who is in good standing, okay, sometimes many gurus prefer that before hearing from anyone else, that you ask them, okay, because everyone has a different mood. And also, unfortunately, some people are not, sometimes speak not exactly the philosophy of Prabhupada. So you have to know that you simply ask your authority, ask your guru before hearing. This is important. Okay, and that's the next section. All right, so we were talking about hearing. Okay, this is concluding the section on hearing. What we have to hear? Srila Prabhupada's lectures, and we have them here in the center. Now, anytime if someone wants us to copy, we can copy for you these lectures. You can come now also if you want. Listen to our lectures of Prabhupada. Prabhupada descended here to liberate us. There's no other purpose. He's not under karma. He didn't take birth because of his karma like us. Srila Prabhupada came as a messenger of Krishna to deliver us. And therefore, every word he spoke, every word he wrote in the book is for our benefit. So let us hear the lectures. We would, people hear so many things daily, nonsense, YouTube, videos, Facebook, but what we should hear is this. Okay, that is the subject of hearing. I conclude. At the end of this, if anyone has any question, you can ask me. Okay, now I'm going to the next topic, which is quite short. This is regarding learning and memorizing shlokas. Okay, now Prabhupada wanted us to preach. I'm mentioning this again and again. In whatever way, mainly by distributing books, but also in different ways. So if you preach, people will ask questions, people will challenge. You should be able to explain your position. Krishna consciousness. Why is Krishna supreme? Can we answer? Why does the jiva have to worship God? Which verse in Gita tells us that answer? We should know this. Everyone should know. It deepens our faith, and if anyone attacks us, we can quote the verses. Okay, so he instructed us to learn verses. Prabhupada, and okay, before that again, so Prabhupada wanted us to learn these verses so that we could defend and also propagate Krishna consciousness. Verses are authoritative. If I just chant a verse, then you can establish a point. On my own, who will listen to me? Who are you? Someone is quoting, someone is giving his opinion. So everyone has an opinion, not only you. So in this way, we have to quote verses. Now, there's a particular book which has main verses that Srila Prabhupada quoted. What's it called? Prabhupada SLOKAS. Selected verses from Vedic literature, something like that. So that book is a good book to start with. You can open that book and see the main verses in BHAGAVAD-GITA, SRIMAD Bhagavatam, and you can memorize them. But another way to memorize verses is while you are hearing lectures of Prabhupada or of someone, and while you are reading the books, Krishna conscious books, you come across verses, and those verses are explaining certain points. And if you pick a verse which you particularly like, how it's explaining some point which you had a doubt in, and how it cleared your doubt, then you can memorize that verse. You will memorize it faster because you are attracted to it. So in that way, you can learn verses which come across your hearing and reading initially. But then also in an organized way, you can get this book, selected verses in from Vedic literatures that Srila Prabhupada quoted. Okay, for more information, you can contact us. We can learn mostly Bhagavad-Gita first, the verses we are talking about. We can learn mostly Bhagavad-Gita verses first, then Srimad Bhagavatam, gradually others. We can also learn everything at once, but primarily Bhagavad-Gita is what we preach from. Out of all the books of Prabhupada, mostly we preach from Bhagavad-Gita. Bhagavad-Gita contains the essence of our philosophy. And then Srimad Bhagavatam goes deeper. So Gita, Bhagavatam, these verses are most prominent. But then we have others, but we can learn all of them, but start with Bhagavad-Gita. So technique of learning the verses. There's no special way, but just some tips which some of us do, we'll just explain. If you want, you can do that. Okay, now the best thing is to learn a verse in the morning. In the morning, the mind is fresh. There's nothing else in our mind. Generally, whatever we pick up in the morning, we're able to keep it the whole day. So, one verse daily in the morning before breakfast. That means we are chanting Hare Krishna. After our chanting, we can learn it before breakfast. Because when you start to have breakfast and eat, then everything changes. The whole psychological state changes because some tastes come in your mouth and the taste make you remember something. Then body starts to digest, so the blood goes to the stomach. So before anything, when the mind is still peaceful after chanting, you may learn a verse. Which verse? That you decide the night before. You can even list the verses that you want to learn. The next day, you are ready. This is the verse I want. And you spend about 10 minutes memorizing the verse. How to do that? Read the verse out loud. Why should you read it out loud? Because if you read the verse out loud, 3 senses are involved: the eyes, the tongue, and the ears. So when we read it, all 3 are at once trying to memorize. The tongue is memorizing how it sounds, how to say it. Eyes are looking at it, pictorial input, and the ears are hearing. So first we read the verse out loud in Sanskrit. Then we read the word-to-word translation. Each word, we read the translation, and then we get an idea. Then we read the full translation, the text. So then we know the message of the verses, and then we know each word in the verse, how it's contributing to that full translation. And in this way, we have to learn it. It's difficult to explain fully like this, in this way, but I hope you understood me. Read the verse out aloud, then read the word-to-word translation, then read the full translation. So I will take an example. Supposing I want to look at this verse, Jnanam teham savijnanam idam bhakrami asheshataha yat gyatva neha bhuyanyat gyatam yam avashishyate. Now I want to memorize it. So what I'll do, I will look at the verse, then look at the translation. Okay. Then I look at the word-to-word. Jnanam, phenomenal knowledge. Te, unto you, savijnanam, sir, with vijnanam, numinous knowledge. Idam, this Vakshyami, shall explain. So now I look at the verse, I read the word-to-word. When I finish reading word-to-word, again I read the verse to memorize. But when I memorize the verse, I know each word, the meaning. So I can structure it like this in my mind. And because my mother tongue is not Sanskrit, then whatever language you're reading, Kannada, English, if you read in that translation, you'll remember the verse translation. You will, and that's how you remember the verse. So then you read the verses and the word, and you connect the word. Jnanam, I shall now give unto you this knowledge, full knowledge. Te, aham, I. So just practice like that, and then you just repeat the verse and try to remember it in your mind. But at the same time, if you forget 1 or 2 words, then you remember what is the full sentence, and you remember the translation from this, so you can form it again. So a little complicated, but maybe if you hear this a few times, what I'm saying, then you can try and do that. Okay, so here it is. without translation. All right. Now keep a notepad. Update the verses that you learn. The verse you learn in the morning. Just explain that in the morning, the verse you hear first, that you note in the pad, you write it down. And then you try to recall the verse the whole day. As you're recalling the verse, you read it. If you cannot recall the verse, you take it out and look at it to remember. Okay, so then if you forget again, you look at it. And this way in the whole day, you remember. The next day, again, you look at another verse. Then you write it in the next page. And you memorize that verse throughout the day. But you also look at the previous verse. And so on and so on. At a time, you can have 3 or 4 verses which you're looking at. After you pass day 5 or 6, then you can forget about the first verse. Continue memorizing and getting new ones, then leaving the old ones. Then maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, you try to remember the previous one so you don't forget. That's the way. And it said there that you use a pad. You see here, keep a notepad. You keep it with you the whole day. When we learn verses, we don't just learn to use them, but we also memorize them. Sorry, what am I saying? Yeah, we don't just memorize the verse, but we have to learn to use them. Like I just, if I memorize a particular verse and I repeat it like a parrot, but then I cannot know when it is that I have to speak it, then it's a problem. I have to know when I have to use that verse to establish some siddhanta. How do we get that point? We get that by just repeating it. We repeat the verse again, read the translation, read the word-to-word verse, and just contemplate on the meaning and try to understand how you can use the words and different things in the verse. Okay, that also requires some practice. So just start revising the verses now. And when we hear lectures of Prabhupada and read his purport, we'll see how he's using the verses. So we can do that. Okay, this comes to the end of the presentation today. So it was a bit, some disturbance initially. Even the power went in between. So sometimes that happens, depends on the mood, I guess. Okay, so Hare Krishna, end of today's part 4. The last part I'm trying, hopefully will be tomorrow, but we'll see to confirm.